Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Philip. This is the Ranger's Respite, and it is a Monday, which means that you're getting a different video from a review. Typically, these are rants. This isn't so much a rant as just me answering a question from a friend who asked me, "What does bottled and bond or bonded mean?" And doesn't matter. Before I get into that, just really quick, I'm selling these French oak uh, ballpoint twist pens. The French oak is from a barrel that held cognac for 45 years before being used to finish a peated American single malt whiskey in the Pacific Northwest. Now, on to the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897. I'm actually going to start with um, why it was important in 1897. Because this was the first Consumer Protection Act ever passed in the United States, or by the United States government. I understand that there were some royal customer protection acts that were passed in England that covered the colonies, but this is the first one passed by an American government. So, why did they need the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897? And I think that the best place to start on this is to say, well, at that point in time, when you went to, say, a public house or a tavern, and you got a drink that included spirits, or perhaps you were buying spirits from a general store or somewhere else, frequently the tavern or pub owner or general store owner had a barrel and they were bottling it on site. In some cases, to order. You came in and you said, "Hey, I'd like, say, a jug of this or a jug of that," and they'd fill it. Now, a lot of spirit at that point in time was sold white. Basically, they'd distill it, put it in barrels for transport, not necessarily for aging, although it was already starting to be understood that the type of barrel that you used um, affected the quality of the spirit. And if you let it sit in a barrel, it aged for longer and became a more desirable product. Um, and as aging became more desirable for spirits in the United States, um, there were people who called rectifiers who would take this spirit and doctor it to make it more pleasing. Now, on the surface, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. A rectifier might be doing things like, steeping in some tea leaves or something to, sort of give it a little bit of a darker color, cover up some of the sharpness of that alcohol bite, or to cover up some of the faints or um, off notes from cutting too far into the tails. Notes like wet cardboard or wet dog are notes that are, or gym socks, are commonly found in the tail. That's all the heavier oils and whatnot that are, frankly, not desirable notes to have in your end product. Um, and rectifiers weren't necessarily setting out to dupe the public, although it is pretty clear that there were some that were shady. And in fact, maybe a great deal of them were. At the point in time, most whiskey was sold from a distillery to somebody who would rectify it or just straight up bottle it, or directly to public houses or taverns where the barrels were kept and decanted into bottles as needed to supply the patronage of the tavern or public house. And that's where we get into the, you know, what it means to bottle a whiskey and why it was necessary. Because say I'm a tavern owner and I've got a barrel of whiskey, it cost me a lot of money and I had to pay taxes on it too. Um, but I don't want to spend any more money and I want to sell it or sell the contents of the barrel in my public house. Or if I'm a rectifier, I want to stretch it as far as I can. So, I might be adding water to it to stretch it. Or if I've got a barrel that is just kind of off, I might be doing things like throwing, like I said, tea leaves, or sometimes roots of like sassafras roots or birch root or something into it to sort of get some of that flavor into it to cover up and mask some of those faints or that like harsh alcoholness. And that started to have a negative impact on the way the public viewed whiskey and other distilled spirits. But whiskey was one of the major examples of this being done to spirit sold to the public under potentially false pretenses, which resulted in a loss of confidence in the producers. So in 1897, Congress passed the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897. And I'm just going to read some of it because it's actually kind of interesting, and I'll sort of go through it and I'll break it down and I will explain roughly, where things are. So, or what things are rather. So, just going to go full screen on this. Don't worry if you can't read this. I will be reading it. So, the term bond, bonded, bottled in bond, or aged in bond or phrases containing these or synonymous terms may be used, including as part of a brand name, only if the distilled spirits are comprised of the same type of spirit. So, it has to be all bourbon, all rye whiskey, all malt whiskey, all brandy, all vodka. Again, I said that I'd explain that. I think I did that in this take, but I promise I'll get to that. Distilled in the same distilling season as defined in 5.1 by the same distiller at the same distillery. So, for example, let's start with distilling season. There are 2 distilling seasons. The first one is the period from January 1st through June 30th, which is the spring distilling season, or the period from July 1st to December 31st, which is the fall distilling season. And the same distillery or same distiller. So, like if you've got, say, a head distiller and he, is only head distiller part-time. So, say he's on one week and somebody else is on the next. You can't theoretically bottle whiskeys distilled under those 2 different guys in the same bottling and call it bottle and bond. Same distillery, also very important. You can't say, oh, I've sourced these barrels from another distillery or this spirit from another distillery, and I've got this spirit that I've distilled myself, blend them together, put them in barrels, and call it a bonded whiskey. Stored for at least 4 years in wooden containers wherein the spirits have been in contact with the wood surface, except for vodka, which must be stored at least 4 years in wooden containers coated or lined with paraffin or other substance which will preclude contact of the spirit with the wood surface, and except for gin, which must be stored in paraffin-lined or unlined wooden containers for at least 4 years. So basically what this is saying is to be a bonded spirit, with the exception of vodka and gin, it has to be in a new charred oak barrel. To be a vodka or gin, has to be lined. It has to be aged for 4 years in a paraffin or other inert material lined wooden barrel. So basically, the gin and the vodka can't come, or the vodka specifically, can't come into contact with the wood at any point in those 4 years. The gin can be in an unlined wooden container, which to me would, for me, I think this is just saying that the gin can be either in a paraffin-lined barrel or a regular barrel. I don't think I've ever seen a bottle and bond gin. I'm going to have to do some looking. Okay, number 4. Unaltered from their original condition or character by the addition or subtraction of any substance other than by filtration, chill proofing, or other physical treatments which do not involve the addition of any substance which will remain in the finished product or result in a change in type or class. So basically, you can proof it, you can filter it, and that's about it. Other physical treatments, I'm not sure what that would involve, except for maybe a Lincoln County process, which is just another way of filtering. But basically what this means is can't add flavors. You can't do a wash on it that changes the content by removing oils in any significant form. And you can't do anything that would change its type or class, which I find interesting because I have here an example of a bottle and bond stout cask finished bottle and bond American single malt whiskey, and I'm wondering if the finishing changes the type or class. That may be a question for me to pose to Amanda Beckwith, which I very well may have to do. But that's pretty straightforward. Number 5, reduced and improved by the addition of only pure water to 50% alcohol by volume, 100 degrees proof, and bottled at 50% alcohol by volume or 100 degrees proof. So you'll often see the Bottle and Bond Act reduced to the, oh yeah, it's got to be from one distillery, bottled at 50% alcohol by volume, and aged in a government warehouse. And I'll get to some of that later. Now, there's something interesting. Imported spirits labeled as bottle and bond or other synonymous term described above must be manufactured in accordance with paragraphs 1A through 6 of this section and may only be so labeled if the laws and regulations of the country in which the spirit are manufactured authorize the bottling of spirits in bond and required or specifically authorize such spirits to be so labeled. The bottle and bond or synonymous statement must be immediately followed in the same font and type size by the name of the country under whose laws and regulations such distilled spirits were so bottled. So, this is basically saying that, like, say if a Canadian company wanted to release a bottled and bond Canadian whiskey, it would not only have to meet the American standards for bottle and bond, but those standards would have to be the same in Canada. That's just an example. I don't know if Canada has laws for bottled and bond spirits. That's just basically what it's saying. And I am not aware of any other country that has bottled and bond as a distinct category. And C, domestically manufactured spirits labeled as bottled and bond or with some other synonymous statement must bear the real name of the distillery or trade name under which the distiller distilled and warehoused the spirits, and the number of the distilled spirits plant in which distilled, and the number of the distilled spirits plant in which it was bottled. The label may also bear the name or trade name of the bottler. So, I have a wonderful example of that specific. It just occurred to me. I didn't show you guys the Goose Island because I forgot that I was looking at that you were just looking at the screen. So just really quick, this is that bottled and bond stout cask finished American single malt whiskey. So I'm wondering if that finishing cask changes its type or class. I will have to ask Amanda Beckwith. And this is that wonderful example of that last standard. So this is McTavish, bottled and bond bourbon whiskey. The War Chief is the fanciful name for this whiskey. And it is bottled and bond bourbon whiskey aged 7 years, bottled at 100 proof, 50% alcohol by volume, as you well know. And on the back, it has distilled by Midwest Grain Products, DSPIN 15016, and bottled by Coastal Pure Beverages, LLC, DSP-SC 15001. Now, I was not aware that it could be bottled by a separate DSP, a separate company entirely. And that's really interesting. And that's kind of a cool wrinkle in this, where you can actually, if you're a bottler, source a bonded whiskey and sell a bonded whiskey. But the hoops to jump through are enough that it doesn't make sense for most folks. And now we get to probably the last bit of this video. I've been going on for 15 minutes. I probably lost most of you, but if you are still here, why does it matter? You see, we've gotten to a point where there are so many distillers, so many bottlers, that, you know, it doesn't make sense for them. And there's a plurality of spirits available that are high quality spirits. It doesn't make sense for them to do things that would harm their customer base to sell more whiskey, or to misrepresent what they have to sell more whiskey. And I will come back to that in a moment, I promise. You see, there are other rules that govern how spirits are produced that make them safe for consumption. And as a base level, you know, when you go to a store, pretty much anything on the shelves, virtually everything on the shelves, it's going to tell you exactly what it is, where it came from, and has a company attached. And at some point, you've got to wonder, does the extra bits of the Bottled in Bond Act really matter? And I think that they do, because the text of the rules basically forbids a distillery from doing anything outside of a very, very narrow scope. So, like, the Lincoln County process just barely makes the cut. They can't cut it with something to give it a flavor. They can't, you know, do anything to it that would change its type or class. So, like, for example, they can't say throw herbs in it and, you know, make a tea whiskey. They can't, you know, cut it with a significant amount of, like, sweetener or, you know, flavoring substance. So you know exactly what you're getting. You know what proof point it's going to be. You know where it came from, who distilled it, and you know that it's only cut with water, pure water. So I said that I'd come back to the, you know, companies don't have any incentive to lie about their product to sell more of it. And the thing is, many of them don't outright lie, but a lot of companies aren't 100% transparent about where their whiskey comes from. So, like, you can go into a store and you can pick up a bottle of whiskey and it's got a great label, you like it. It's straight bourbon whiskey, so you know that it's a minimum 51% corn in the mash. You know that it was distilled to a maximum of 160 degrees proof, put into a barrel at a maximum of 125 degrees proof, aged for a minimum of 2 years, and if it doesn't have an age statement, it is at least 4 years old. But you don't know where it was distilled. Pardon me. And, you know, suppose that it's got a 3-year age statement. It's straight bourbon whiskey. It says high rye straight bourbon whiskey. And you think to yourself, perfect. I know what that is. I know what's in that bottle. It's probably MGP. It's probably 60-36-4 MGP, high rye bourbon. If it's 3 years old, chances are pretty good. And they like to use weasel words like produced by or bottled by. And those don't tell you that they were distilled by that company. Sometimes they will use language like finished by. And finished by, to me, brings out as a, hey, what do they mean by that? There's a great example of the wording on a label of sourced bourbon from a company in Virginia having the specific phrase finished and bottled by, and then the company. And it had all this information on the side. 6036-4 high rye bourbon, aged 3 years, bottled at 46% alcohol by volume or 92 proof. And because I have so much knowledge of the industry and I recognize that mash bill, I went, that's funny. Look on the back. I mean, it is not unheard of for a distillery to go, hey, we like this mash bill from MGPI. We're going to replicate it. And maybe they do something a little bit different. They use heirloom grains. But I take this bottle, I look on the big backside, and it says finished and bottled by company. And that told me everything that I needed to know. They didn't really distill that product. A big chunk of their marketing, under the watchful eyes of the Atlantic, doesn't really mean anything because this was aged in Indiana. It was distilled in Indiana. It is a standard off-the-shelf product offered by MGPI in Lawrence, Indiana. And that is not illegal. It's just a little bit shady, and I didn't like it very much. I still don't like it very much. It's a pet peeve of mine that companies feel the need to do that. But with the bottled and bond designation, you know that they distilled it. And you know that it was aged a minimum of 4 years, and frequently, if it's more than 4 years old, there will be an age statement. For example, that Heaven Hill, 7 years old. The McTavish is 7 years old. The Rabble Rouser there. Come on, brain. The Rabble Rouser there is 6 years old. They all will say aged a minimum of 4 years because that's the standard. So you know where it was distilled, you know who distilled it, you know how old roughly it is, a minimum age for it. You know that it was only cut with pure water, and you know that it is a high quality product because that's what bottled and bond has come to mean. It's not just an extra hoop to jump through to make people like your product more, because the standard set for the product set a standard for the quality of the product. And I think that's an important thing to understand, both for consumers and for producers. Because at the end of the day, anything you can do to improve the likelihood of somebody picking up one of your products is something that maybe you should consider. And I know that for me, at least, seeing bottled and bond or bonded or any of the other synonymous phrases makes me immediately go, that's a quality product. It's a product I know I can trust. And that's, at the end of the day, sort of one of the more important aspects of what that legislation means. And it is not lost on me that the first Consumer Protection Act passed by the U.S. government is protecting consumers from spirits. Well, not really from spirits, but from shady individuals that would use spirits to take advantage of consumers. By the way, this isn't a bonded spirit in my glass. This happens to just be leftover from something that I poured earlier. It is single malt scotch. And I kind of forgot that, and I picked it up and went, Then I remembered that I had poured myself some Tomentol earlier. Anyway, enough with that. If you like the show, if I helped you learn something today, and you'd like to support the show, please consider purchasing a ballpoint twist pen. They're $25. They're made from a piece of French oak cognac cask that was used to hold cognac for 45 years before being used to finish a peated American single malt in the Pacific Northwest. Talking too much. Or maybe you'd like a sticker, shirt, hat, something from TeePublic that's got my new channel logo on it. There's a link to that in the description down below as well. As always, it has been great to talk to you guys. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And if I can't answer them, I know where to look and I know who to ask. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Stay happy, stay geeks, Slancha.